Hello. So far this year, we have heard three great stories. We have heard the great story of the beginning of life on the universe. We have heard the story of the beginning of life on Earth. And we have heard the story of the beginning of man, of humans, what those humans needed to survive. So, our next great story, we're going to go a little bit deeper into it. So, let me share my screen. We have our fourth great story. And I want you to just use your imagination here. I'm not able to really do this play, but we will imagine. So you and I are early humans, and we have no words. We cannot talk. I have found a rock by the river, and I'm going to try to communicate to you that there are more rocks by the river, but I can't use words. Mm, mm. So, in order to communicate, early man used these gestures. But without words, maybe there were mistakes that could have been made. How do you know what I'm trying to communicate to you? Yes, I'm pointing at the rock, I'm pointing over there. Um, how would you know that I'm trying to ask to say, hey, there's more rocks over here? I could be asking, saying, like, there's danger over here, or who knows? The message maybe could have been mistaken for something else. So early humans could smile and make gestures, like I just did, but they didn't have words. So one way they solved this problem was by drawing pictures to communicate things. Sometimes they drew these pictures in caves to show people what they wanted to say. And we've already looked at some cave drawings and explored, but this was earliest man's way of communicating messages. So while they communicated with pictures, the early humans were also developing their ability to make sound with their voices. Like other animals, early humans made sounds to show that they were in pain or surprised, but they soon found ways to make sounds that were words that communicated what they wanted or saw or were doing. Because we can, early humans maybe if you ever see depictions of Neanderthals, cavemen, there would be grunting. But I bet you never thought about, well, you and I talk, we talk with our parents, we talk with everybody around us, but that language had to be developed. Earliest humans did not have words. So, about 5,000 years ago, a group of people who lived together in ancient Egypt developed another way to communicate. They made a written language using pictures called hieroglyphics to show what they meant. So here are some hieroglyphics. So first, the ancient Egyptians wrote their messages on stone or clay, which was plentiful where they lived. Then they worked out that if you crushed a plant called papyrus and dried it, it would turn into paper and you could write on that. So that's where the word paper comes from this very first. Egyptians were the first to find this papyrus plant, crush it, dry it, and make paper. Pretty cool. And around this time, in another place, people called Sumerians were also experimenting with writing. Their way was faster than the Egyptians. It used little wedged shapes called cuneiform to communicate messages. So this is what this cuneiform looked like. And the Sumerians and the Egyptians, they weren't the only people experimenting with writing. People in Pakistan were experimenting with writing on clay pots. There were also people in the Yucatan Peninsula who wrote on temple walls. So these groups of people living in different places were all around the same time coming to see, like, forming these languages, these written languages, and finding different mediums or ways to write things down. Because if you think about it, if you have to write on a wall, you're going to have to, come with me to the wall and read what I wrote. Despite all the experimentation, there was still no alphabet. How did that happen? There was a group of people called the Phoenicians who lived in the east of the Mediterranean Sea. So you can see here. So this is a picture of the top of Africa here, you can see. And up here in the corner, ancient Egypt. And there's this little strip here. This is where, like, Samaria is. And then right here, this yellow dot is Phoenicia, where the Phoenicians lived. And these Phoenicians, they were awesome soldiers. Or I'm sorry, they were awesome sailors. Blah. They sailed often to their neighbors and the Egyptians and the Sumerians, because as we saw, they were fairly close. And they were also famous for making glass, cloth, metal, and a special purple dye called Tyrion Purple. So Tyrion Purple was made out of a shellfish that had been crushed. It was very expensive, so only very rich people could afford it. The Phoenicians' neighbors, including the Romans, really liked this dye and the other objects the Phoenicians had. So the Phoenicians were making a lot of money and selling to so many different people, so they had to come up with a way of remembering what they had done and what they needed to do. And this Tyrion Purple is kind of like this origination of, if you've ever heard stories like the Emperor's New Clothes and things, there's always been this kind of association with purple and royalty, which has very real roots because of the materials needed to make the dye. So this Tyrion Purple coming from the shellfish, it was very expensive to make. So only very rich people and royalty could afford it. So the Phoenicians tried something similar to the Egyptians and drew symbols, but they found a problem. So if you saw one of these drawn, what would it mean? Could mean an arm, could mean hi, could mean that way, right? Could mean different things. So when trying to communicate things quickly, the Phoenicians were trying to, like they were trying to do, the message had to be clear and easy to understand. So they came up with a way to change the picture words into simple lines. They decided that each set of lines would stand for a certain sound. A letter B would mean B. This became the first alphabet. So this alphabet was born out of this necessity. Before this, all the written language were pictures. But like we saw with the arm, there were many pictures that could be interpreted differently. So it can cause confusion. As time went on, the Phoenicians began to trade more with a group of people called the Greeks. The Greeks really liked the Phoenician alphabet and used it for their own language, but they made a few changes. Did you know the word alphabet actually comes from the Greek letters alpha and beta? So the way of writing Making words from an alphabet became very popular. There are now 50 different alphabets around the world. Most of them have between 20 and 30 letters. However, writing with alphabets is not the only way of writing. Some cultures, like the Chinese, use characters to communicate. So, our English alphabet, we have 26 letters. Characters are a little bit different. But here's the Greek alphabet: alpha and beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon, phi, chi, psi, omega. So, yes. And then these are characters, a little bit different than the alphabet. So here we see different characters for, these are different animals, but this looks like the Chinese zodiac. Every year there's a different animal for the year. So these are characters. So humans can now use gestures, speak, and write. They could explain complex ideas and events that happened, and they could also share information. But what about numbers? Well, that's a story for another day. So we have one more great story coming, the story of numbers, and we will hear about that in a couple weeks. So I hope you enjoyed the story of communication, of words, of being able to talk and write to one another. We don't really think about it because, it's something we just all do, we take for granted. But being able to communicate with each other and express is very important. And even for people who are born deaf or not able to speak, there's sign language. If someone is blind, there's Braille that they can read. So we have found ways to adapt as humans and to speak to each other because it is important. So I hope you enjoy exploring the vocabulary and the Padlet and looking at the choice board and choosing something to take this a little bit further with yourself. So have a great day, and I'll see you all next time.